Perfect. Thank you so much, Ben. Well, as Ben said, Jesper Scherpenhuizen, I'm a consultant sales engineer here in the EMEA region, responsible for the Benelux. And well, as I talked to you about during the last two community of practice meetings, feel free to add me on LinkedIn, look me up on Twitter if that still exists. But also, if you're interested in any other demos or topics, have a look at my YouTube channel where you might find very interesting demos there as well. And also a bit more technical deep dives will be there too. Um, just a quick recap of where we are when we talk about NLP, and also specifically how we position that within intelligent automation. So within intelligent automation, one of the key capabilities is, of course, cognitive capture or intelligent document processing, however you want to call it. But in that, we have that natural language processing capability built in. And if we then look into how we then position that within KTA, it is indeed a full-fledged part of the TotalAgility product as it stands today. What you might also know is that the natural language processing capability that we're going to talk about today is also present in the other Kofax transformation enabled products. So if you are using Kofax RPA and you're using DTS or document transformation services, you will be able to leverage these NLP capabilities too. If you are using KC KTM, so Kofax Capture with the Kofax transformation modules, you will also be able to leverage these NLP capabilities. But today I'm going to be talking about the very specifics within KTA and how you can leverage them as well. So before we then dive into NLP on its own, why are we talking about cognitive capabilities within transformation, within IDP, within cognitive capture? Because we all know that OCR itself is not enough. We are not just looking for the crude data that is present in documents, in emails, anything like that. No, what we're looking for is we're looking for that validated data set hidden within that unstructured content. So I sometimes use the analogy of unstructured content is like crude oil, and just like crude oil, we'll need to refine it before we can actually use it. So we use the tools that are disposal to do that, and within the next stages then is how do we then transform that unstructured data into usable, validated business data? We, of course, use very declarative methods. So for those of you who are already quite adept at KTA, transformation modules, or even DTS, we already know a lot of these declarative methods, like, for instance, the format locator, but also much of the other capabilities there. But we also have these cognitive capabilities. And when we talk about those cognitive capabilities, one of the buzzwords you might want to say today is, of course, natural language processing. So if we then look at natural language processing, what do we actually mean? Is we mean the capability of a computer or a system or anything you might want to throw in there, the ability to understand what text is about. So we're not talking about how is, for instance, a system capable of discerning, let's say, key value pairs, but more actually reading through prose and determining what the important information is hidden within that. So as you might then understand, that capability is very language specific. And why that is important, I'll talk a bit more about that later on. So if we then talk about the very specific NLP capabilities within the Kofax Intelligent Automation platform as a whole, we talk about these four capabilities. I'm going to talk a bit more about these in more detail going forward. But what I do want to also stress here is that given the open and scalable nature of specifically TotalAgility, it is, of course, always a possibility to use other NLP engines. If you want to use an NLP engine for, let's say, from Azure or from AWS or from Google, nothing is stopping you from using those. Um, and I do have some videos on how to do that on my channel. So if you've got any questions, have a look at those. If you've got questions after that, just drop me a line on how to incorporate these external engines within TotalAgility. But today we're talking about these very specific functionalities within TotalAgility itself. And this list is, of course, growing, and the latest capabilities have been added quite recently. But one of the original capabilities that we added to TotalAgility is what we call named entity extraction. So exactly as I said, in that large piece of text, we need to understand what the important actors are. And we also need to be able to classify them. So in the example on the screen, you'll see, okay, we are specifically looking for entities that are talking about amounts or currency amounts in this specific example. But what we also want to be able is, for instance, to find people, places, roles, job titles, you name it, just by extracting and finding and locating those kind of entities within a piece of text. And also at the same time, as I said, classifying them to the type of entity they are. And this is, of course, very important when you look at some, let's say, business applications with, for instance, within financial services. If you need to do your customer due diligence, know your customer kind of exercises, maybe anti-money laundering, you'll need to know exactly where people are mentioned in a document. We need to understand how often they are then found, but we also need to know how important they are at the same time. So this will then add that capability to it. And if we then also dive into the next capability, which is sentiment analysis. So sentiment analysis, as the name implies, is about, okay, well, how positive or how negative is a piece of text? And of course, as this is all pre-built into Kofax transformation within TotalAgility, you are then also able to say, well, I just want to have the sentiment on a very specific paragraph, or I want to have the sentiment of the whole text. And the beauty is, if you then take sentiment analysis and you combine that with that entity extraction capability we just talked about on the previous slide, you'll actually start to see a bit more. Let's go back to that. Well, know your customer, customer due diligence, or anti-money laundering effort. One of the regular checks that financial institutions have to do is a so-called bad press review. So what they'll actually have to do by hand is to go out on the internet and see if whoever's applying for a loan or a bank account or maybe even a mortgage, if they have been mentioned negatively in the press. So let's then, well, take my good friend Ben Hubber as an example. He's applying for a loan at a German bank somewhere. What then happens is someone within their customer due diligence department will actually start to look at, well, has Benjamin Hubber been mentioned in any news articles? And the capability then is, of course, to distill, okay, well, is this a very negative or a very positive way how he has been mentioned? So let's say that we find an article talking about a traffic accident. And of course, if you then look at the overall sentiment of that article, it'll probably be very negative. But why is this important? Because it might very well have been that Ben was mentioned in that same article as being the first one present, providing first aid, therefore being very positive. And that's why that combination of sentiment analysis and entity extraction is very important, because if we combine those, we'll immediately see that it's actually a very positive thing that was said about Ben in that article. So again,
Jasper?
that's yeah.
Quick interruption.
Of
Just to
course.
let you know, only positive press available.
I haven't tested this yet, but I'll give it a check. No worries, no worries. Then, of course, if we look into the third capability that's built into, well, the Kofax NLP capability is theme extraction or theme recognition. So, in one single word or one single description, telling us what the article or what the piece of text is about. Is it indeed about a traffic accident? Is it about traffic? Is it about financial fraud? Or is it potentially even about financing terrorism? Who knows? But you want to have those themes immediately recognized because you can then act upon certain themes within your process that you can then define in TotalAgility. And then third, and certainly not least, this is one of the things that um, I was never that good at. So during my high school years, one of the things we always had to do is we always needed to be able to write a summary. And this is something, well, you're either good at it or not, independently of how you master a language. But the capability to do that summarization is very important. So imagine the capability of having a KTA process scurrying throughout millions of documents and giving you a one, two, or three sentence summary of all those documents at first glance. That's of course something that is very interesting when we combine the NLP capabilities, or essentially artificial intelligence in general, with a human in the loop process. And I've talked about examples in financial services. Same thing is, of course, also true for all other industries. And even if we have some time, we can talk about a bit more. Another great example is, of course, customer service. And I'll actually have a quick example of that at the end of this session. So, that being said, these capabilities, of course, come pre-trained. So you do not need to train KTA to do these four capabilities within NLP. And we have provided this for the languages that you see on your screen. So indeed, English, Spanish, Portuguese, French, German, Italian, Romanian, Dutch, very important, the most important language there is, Japanese, Chinese, and Korean. Of course, if the language that you would like to have is not here, make sure that you then log that with our tech support team. And we're always interested to have customer or partner feedback on these capabilities as well. So let us know through that channel there. With that, I want to leave this until after the demo. What I want to do is I want to quickly open up my transformation designer in TotalAgility and talk a bit more about how we actually work with these NLP capabilities.
Hey, Jasper.
Yeah, of course. Hey.
Before you start with that, do you want to take two questions because they are just related to what you just
Oh,
said?
yeah, sure. Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So, Johnson is asking, is any of these capabilities, like named entity recognition, specific to a region, or will the NLP engine be able to effectively read the entities, including person names of US and Europe region effectively?
So it is not region specific, it is only language specific. So if the piece of natural text that you want to analyze is in the languages we just showed, let me just get that list back on the screen. Then it is able to recognize that. So, as said, what we mean with pre trained languages is that we have been able to train this on an enormous amount of data, an enormous amount of content. And if we then take that into, well, what the technical term actually is within NLP is the corpora, so the overall body of words that we are aware of, that then becomes the recognized entities, not just from, hey, we're looking for words, but we also read that from context, because of course what we're trying to do is we're having the computer understand what the text is about. So even if it's a word that's not pre-trained, it will still be able to recognize, hey, we're now talking about, let's say, if we mention Washington, we could be talking about the historical person, George Washington. We can talk about Washington, D.C., in the District of Columbia. We could also be talking about the state of Washington, and probably even more examples of that word that might come up. But exactly that recognition and that classification of the type, that's of course all taken from context. And I think that that is, of course, one of the key capabilities that we should be focusing on. So again, not territory bound, not geography bound, it's all language bound.
Okay, sounds great. And there's another one from Johnson. Is the engine configured to learn the sentiment correction? Most of the claim-related correspondence seems to be negative. However, in reality, it may just be a general correspondence explaining an accident or claim.
That is a great question. So on the one hand, the pre-trained engine that we're talking about today will not learn based on your examples. But however, we are, of course, continuously improving this engine with our partners. So with every release, you can expect an update. I know that for a future KTA upgrade, we'll have the engine with an entirely new version. But then the question becomes is if you have very specific correspondence coming in, which you want to then classify. Of course, sentiment is always between a -1 and a +1. -1 very negative, +1 very positive, around 0 very neutral. But the other capabilities within transformation are still available to you. So it is still possible for you to say, well, I want to use the sentiment analyzer for that text to give me one piece of input, but I also want to use, let's say, the content classification capabilities within that, or even more advanced, use the paragraph classification capabilities within transformation. And all of those combined can, of course, be evaluated within transformation and give the result that you're looking for. So again, natural language processing and the capabilities that we're talking about today are just another tool in your tool belt, and you can indeed combine them with other locators or other functionality within transformation to get to the validated business data that you're looking for. So again, I hope that helps.
I think so. Johnson, if you have any further questions regarding this, just put it in the Q&A box. So no more questions at the moment, Jesper. You can move on with the designer.
Superb, superb. So what I want to quickly talk about is how do you set these up? So the language packs for, well, NLP come in 3 flavors. You've got Western, you've got Western Extended, and you've got other languages. So for instance, the other languages, you only need to install that if you want to do Chinese, Japanese, or Korean. If you want to have just English, you can just get the Western set. If you want to do Dutch, then you want to install the Western Extended language pack. So what you then actually need to do is on a class level, you'll have to set the natural language processing language. So you'll need to tell the engine this is English. This is, of course, one thing where people say, well, why can't it recognize that automatically? But again, keep in mind that we do have capabilities for language detection within within transformation already. So you can then have that classification of languages done first, then say, okay, I've got an English language, then you set the NLP setting to English, and you've got that for the other languages you want to be processing as well. This might be something what we want to dive in a bit further in later on, maybe in the transformation community of practice at the same time. So once you've set that, you will then be able, of course, once you've set up your groups, you'll be able to set up the actual locators. I do want to make a couple of comments here about the fields. As you can see, you've got your sentiment, which is just a single data point, which will then be filled by that. For the entities, You can do that very straightforward, but I always recommend to set up a table model specifically for the entities, where you've got 4 fields, because for every entity that we find, you'll get 4 data points. So the actual text, the confidence level, because of course we're still talking about artificial intelligence, so there is no 100% always 0 or 1 result. It's always we're always talking about confidence level, so it's always gray in that respect. Then you've got your type, so indeed, is it the person, is it the place, those kind of things. And as I mentioned, the sentiment in the text towards that specific entity. And then, of course, for summary, again, the summary is just a single result. And for the theme, we'll again have the theme table, again, with text, confidence, type, and sentiment. So that being said, we then have those 4 specific locators. So let's start with the sentiment one. And what we can then see is indeed, I hope this is visible for everyone, is that you have a very rudimentary set of settings here, but you can indeed immediately test it. So on this text on the right-hand side, we've got an article that I just pulled from what is it, dutchnews.nl, something like that. And as you can see, it is a very neutral result there. But if I then go into a negative sentiment example, so this is a customer service example, and I test it again, you'll see that it's already quite negative. If we then go into a positive sentiment example, we can go into the test and says it's 0.5. So again, we are higher than 0, which means it's positive. So that's, again, quite interesting. If we then look into the named entity locator, I just took an article from today's CNN's webpage talking about the G20 meet in Indonesia. And if we then have a look at the natural language named entity locator, you'll see that we are able to map the fields of the actual table to the outcomes of that. We're also able to filter through all of the entity types. So let's say, as in the example earlier, I'm only interested in currency amounts, or I'm only interested in people, or I'm only interested in X, Y, and Z. You can filter through that. We also have that confidence threshold. So if you say, well, I only want to have the entities with the highest confidence, you can do that. You can also then filter them through sentiment. But again, keep in mind, you can have multiple locators and multiple fields using this functionality. So if you want to have a list of all positives and all negatives, you are able to do that right there. Then, of course, if we then run this test, it's going to be able to find, well, a lot of these there already. So Putin, very negatively. Bangkok, apparently a bit negative there as well. Xi Jinping, quite negatively there too. Joe Biden, very positive in this piece of text. And it just continues there as well. Also, for instance, here we have the Washington location recognized very neutrally. So again, keep in mind, this is only taken into account, especially for the sentiment, the text that we're looking at. So always keep that in mind. So it's not going to give you any recommendations or additional background on people. It only takes whatever is written in that text that you're analyzing. Same thing is true, of course, for the summary. If we run the summary locator, we are able to configure how many sentences we want to use in that summary that we're writing. And we have 2 specific algorithms that we use. You can use the default or the alternative. And of course, if we then look at the test results, this is indeed the first result. If we take the alternative method, we can test it. As you can see, it's a bit different, but we can also say, well, 3 sentences is too much. Here we have the first one. And then, of course, things like theme recognition. Again, this is able to help you to route specific documents coming in or specific emails coming in. Just have that theme location there, And again, you'll have that filter capability built into the locator itself. And if we then test it, you'll see that we have all of these themes being recognized with very high confidence levels, all the way down to a bit lower there as well. And if we then take other news articles, this is about the new Weird Al Yankovic movie. If we then test that against that, you'll see that we'll have even more results, which is, of course, very useful. Well, maybe not entirely for news articles that we use in here, but if we then apply this, for instance, to that positive sentiment example within customer service, we'll see, hey, here we go, major home renovation, loan processor, loan officer, the bank ride experience. So it's able to extract and identify these themes in that text altogether. So that's just a quick, well, demo of how we can then use natural language processing within the Transformation Designer. Again, this is KTA we're looking at today, but the same principles apply within the Transformation Designer for Kofax RPA document transformation services, but also Kofax transformation modules within or combined with Kofax Capture. That being said, we've been talking about this very specific NLP capability, but also take in mind that this is essentially not the first NLP that you've seen. We talked about the classification of content that's been present within transformation for years upon years. You can also look at that as being NLP because it's able to, based on examples that you provide, a classification engine and identify what kind of documents we're looking at. So maybe that's another community of practice session that we can do, talk about classification, image classification, but also content classification, how you can then do benchmarking, those kind of things. But we also still have the text contact locator. And that is, of course, a piece of trainable NLP that you can use as well. Again, based on a handful of samples, you can just tell the system, hey, this is the data point I'm looking for. And the system will then be able to train from that and use that as well. So if you then combine the pre-trained NLP, the trainable NLP, classification methods, and classification, I mean, well, the whole document classification, but also paragraph classification, you'll have, well, a lot of tools at hand that you can use to build those kind of solutions. So what I want to show you real quickly is an example of a use case that my colleagues in the US have built. So I'm plugging their great work right now, but their example was indeed based on customer service. So if you then design a transformation project based on NLP, and you then present that to a customer services worker in their work queue in this specific manner, you'll immediately see that we've got 2 emails that have come in with all of the NLP capabilities already, well, in a very quick way to see that. So this has been a very negative one. That's been a positive one. We can then, of course, raise or lower the urgency of the response needed from that customer services employee. And if we then look into the actual validation screen, which then becomes, well, the NLP workbench for a customer services employee. So again, in this interface, we were able to present a 360 view, not just of the document that came in, but we can also pull in additional data about this customer, perhaps. Maybe we want to have the ability to look at earlier conversations as well. But in this example, we're just looking at the inputs that we've taken from that email. So again, you'll see we've got a negative sentiment, negative smiley face. We've got the information, the positive entities. So in this case, the person who sent this email, Edward Mancini, is very positive about himself, but he's very negative towards the officer, Bankwright, and specifically the officer named John Smith. This then immediately presents a customer services representative with the means to immediately either escalate, forward, or maybe even respond immediately to this customer services complaint. But the opposite is, of course, also true. If you've got a very positive piece of feedback, so in this case, it's Laura Wilson, who we all know and love, with a very positive comment about the bank ride experience that she's had, and you'll see that she's very positive towards Bankwright, the officer, and in this specific case, the officer Janet Morgan. So again, very easy to immediately see, okay, well, what's this about? What do we need to do with this? And what's the next step? So that is the content that I've prepared for today's session. As said, this is just another tool in your transformation and total agility toolkit. I would recommend everyone to play around with it and see what it can do and how it can help you to drive more value out of your KTA implementation going forward. It's going to open up a lot of doors for a lot of use cases that maybe most organizations haven't even thought about. And as always, if you've got any questions about this, feel free to reach out to me either through LinkedIn, through email, through Twitter, again, if that's still online. But also use your mobile device to scan this QR code. It's going to bring you directly to my YouTube channel where you find, an example like this as well, but much and much more content. So that's a shameless plug that I've just done there. But with that, I also want to pass it back to my good friend, Ben. Ben, I'm curious to hear how that was.
Yeah, thank you, Jasper. So great presentation as always. I give people a little bit more time to scan the QR code. And also, of course, you can Google Jasper, and I can promise only good articles on the internet, right?